Hey, yeah, so Vera and I are here at Tenwick for a few days, and Dean has asked us to share some thoughts about mom and dad, especially about mom, as we're standing here in the Steury building at Tenwick, which has just undergone a major renovation after a fire a couple years ago. And, it's just fun to be at Tenwick and to think back on the earlier days at times and what it was like. Tenwick is completely unrecognizable today from the Tenwick that I grew up in. I remember at one point in my mom and dad's time at Tenwick, mom was helped in the bookkeeping office, the treasurer's office. And every night she would come up to the hospital into the bookkeeping office, and she would count the money, the earnings for that day, and compare them against the receipts for that day, just to make sure that everything matched up and was in order. My mom joked about having her own personal security guard that would escort her up here each evening. That was our dog, Cinder. Cinder was an Alsatian, or a German Shepherd dog, and mom would every evening walk up to the hospital with Cinder into the bookkeeping office. Cinder would lie on the floor as she did the counting of the money and the checking of the receipts. I remember several times coming up with mom and helping her count the money, stack the bills, count the coins or whatever, so that she could get her work done a little faster and
How old were you?
And get back down home. I think that this would have been in my probably early high school years when that happened. And but those are good memories of how mom served in that role as one of the many different roles that she served in here at Tenwick in ministry, apart from, of course, her main role as mother and wife, supportive wife to my dad. Dad was always very busy at the hospital, and so obviously we kids at home spent a lot more time with mom on a day-to-day basis. But she was a great mother with a great sense of humor. We always loved her jokes and her humor. Now, we loved them up until we'd heard them the 50th time or the 60th time, and then we would joke with her about them. But she always kept a good humor and a positive attitude, really, in serving here at Tenwick.
How about her work with the community, the women, and I hear stories of all the things she did out in the community with the ladies, especially.
Sure. In the earlier years, her ministry out in the community focused more on the women's groups of the local churches or the district in this area, and she would go and attend women's group meetings with them, and she enjoyed that, getting out into the village, into homes, interacting with the people around to worship and pray together and study the Bible. But then later, it was actually, I think it was after I graduated from high school, that mom was invited to work in the community health department. And they invited her to do the spiritual training or the spiritual teaching mixed in with all of the health lessons in the community health committees and the community health helpers training courses. And that just lit mom up. I mean, she just was so excited about that ministry with community health. It gave her a second wind in ministry as we kids were leaving the nest and going off to college and so on. That became a new cause for mom and a new involvement that just really gave her joy. And she looked back on those years with community health as some of her most fulfilling and exciting years of ministry in Kipsigee's land. And of course, that was not just focused on women. It was men, women, everyone in the community. And she had lots of opportunities to present, these very basic lessons of the principles of Christianity, or the basic tenets of Christianity, and encouraging people to pay attention to their spiritual health as well as their physical health in that community health holistic training type of model. And those were great years for Mom. And
Did she translate Ian Kipsky's materials as well? Do you know?
she did some translation
She
in
was
different
fluent,
venues, along the line. Mom and Dad studied Kipsigis when they first arrived. They did their language study at Caricho.
Very.
And then initially began coming to Tenwick on the weekends for Dad to kind of start get into the work, and then back to Caricho for a week of study and so forth. Once they'd finished their course of study, then of course they began practicing and learning on the job, in the home, and so on. And Mom did very well with the language. She learned Kipsigis very well, and could stand up and speak to a group of people and pray in church. Just recently, when we were going through her things after she passed away, I found the Kipsigis songbook. And in that songbook was a prayer written in her handwriting in Kipsigis that I'm sure she delivered at some church in some congregation. And in the prayer, she prayed for the leader of the country, Daniel Arap Moy, and so on. But Mom often spoke and prayed and participated in services.
Now, while we were here with your folks, you were already out of the house. You were down in Maasai land.
Yep.
But of course, we loved Ernie and Sue. But there was also a tough part of her. How would you express that side of her that kind of had to be at times, but in her strength in that sense? Yeah.
She was a strong woman too. You're right. Like you said, she had to be, given the challenges that she and Dad faced in the early days at Tenwick, with him being the only doctor at the hospital for a number of years, and being the one guy who was on call all the time. There were many meals that Mom had prepared and Dad would sit down to, only to be called back up to the hospital or never get down to eat in the first place. But she found a way of taking it in stride and trying to make the best of the situation. When she had a strong opinion about something, she could be very tough on that and express that opinion strongly. We kids probably saw more of that than anyone else, because she also tried to keep that in check too.
I just remember though, when those things came up in meetings, as they always do, she did it also with a sense of real grace too. You could feel the correction or whatever needed to be said, but also in love. I mean, that endeared me in my 2 years that we were here, so you probably felt that as a kid, being disciplined but also being loved, and a little of both.
Yeah. She balanced that well. She did. You're right.
Okay. Any really quick fun stories, travel, trips, things that your mom, did?
Yeah, this isn't exactly a fun story, but it's a memorable story. There are lots of fun stories to tell about our vacations that we used to take. We would go down to the Kenya coast and rent a cottage from some homeowner down there that had these ramshackle, dilapidated cottages. But we thought it was great. We were in a cottage by the beach, and we would do our own cooking and just take games along and books to read. We didn't have a pool or anything fancy. We had snorkels, and we would do snorkeling and stuff. Mom, interestingly, never liked the water. She grew up in a family with 4 brothers who I think dumped her in the pool one time too many, until she hated swimming and being in the water.
Oh, interesting.
But she went along and made sure that everybody had a good time and had a great vacation at the coast. That usually was every April. We would do that during the holiday season and the low rate season, so that we could afford more. But we had great times. There was one year that's very memorable, where we were in this cottage, and it was the day that we were packing up, getting ready to go back home. And in the morning, we were packing all the suitcases and going around the cottage, looking in every nook and cranny to make sure we had collected everything. Well, in my mom and dad's room, there was a chest that was up on legs, and they had put their suitcase on this chest. But up above it, there was like a shelf with a clothes hanging bar under it, and they had hung some clothing on that bar above their suitcase. So my mom, thinking that something might have fallen down behind the suitcase or dropped off of a hanger or something, she shut the suitcase and reached down there and felt to see if there was anything behind the chest and didn't find anything. Well, a few minutes later, Dad came by and had the same thought, not knowing that Mom had checked. He scooted the chest out to look behind it, and there was a puff adder curled up underneath that chest, which would have been inches from my mom's hand as she reached down to check for clothing. Well, oh my goodness, that made us all pretty sober as we finished packing up and just thinking of what if, what could have happened. And as we were pulling away, it was like the whole world had gotten dark, and it was so depressive and everything. And then we learned later that there was also a solar eclipse taking place at the same time, and it really was dark, and it wasn't just all about the depression.
And you didn't know it was happening?
We didn't know it until I think partway into it or something.
That's funny.
But yeah, that was another example of how the Lord protected Mom and kept her from harm.
And of course, I remember the night when the Luo attack, you guys weren't here.
Yeah.
We were with your parents in the living room praying when your dad got the phone call. Men, we must leave now to help the Aguta's house. So we all left, but your mom and the ladies kept praying, and my wife says those were the most amazing prayers she's ever heard from missionary women, all alone, without their husbands, not knowing if their husbands would come back, or your dad. That was quite an amazing experience.
So Mom never really convinced herself that she was that important in the work that Dad did, which obviously she wasn't a doctor, so she couldn't be that, what he was. But we were always telling her, you're just as important. But to me, the thing that solidified her importance was there's this, it's on videotape, all these important doctors from somewhere in the States came, and they were videotaping, in the day of videotape, Dad's story. And they were all sitting around the guest house, and all these important guys in their white coats, and Dad's sitting there talking. And so our daughter, who was 10 at the time, comes walking in the guest house, looks around, and sees Dad, and says, "Grandpa, where's Grandma?" And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, honey, she's not here." And she turned around on her heel and walked right out. She went to find Grandma because nothing else mattered. So she really did get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
Just the thing about Mom is she was always just a great friend. We had a friendship on a level that is not matched to this day. And this month will actually be a year since she died, and we're still wondering how in the world that year went by because we miss her to this day.
Most people don't know or don't remember that there were two buildings that were built at the same time here at Tenwick Hospital that are just not too far from each other. We're standing here in the Steury building, called that, of course, because it was dedicated to Mom, to Steury. But at the very same time, and dedicated on the very same day, there's a Ernie Steury building just across the way here. These were both built and funded at the same time, and I remember in the early 90s when Vera and I were pretty young on the field, the Tolans were on the field, and we were all here for the dedication on that day when these buildings were dedicated in their honor. But since the fire in this building, and all the talk about that, and then the renovation of it and everything, the Steury building has just become such common vernacular here at Tenwick. In fact, you hear somebody saying, "I'm going up to Steury," meaning the building. And it's kind of weird, frankly, to hear my mom's name being used in that way, but we understand and know what they're talking about. But the Steury building has become the much more well-known building at Tenwick because of the fire and the renovation and everything. But the Ernie Steury building is still right here on campus, right across the way.
So what do you think the conversation is over coffee up in heaven?
Oh yeah, Mom's probably letting Dad know or reminding him that her building's the much more famous one back on Earth.
I'm Reverend Ruben Koech. I came to Tenwick when Steury was the CEO, and I got to know the Dr. Steury and the Sue Steury. What I can remember about the two, they were actually one. Most of the time they were actually working together, and Sue was actually supportive to Dr. Steury in the work that he was doing in the hospital as a doctor. I remember when I came, Dr. Steury is the one who brought my wife to work in Tenwick Hospital. We got married in 1993, and I came here, I was as an assistant pastor in Tenwick local church, and I came alone, I left my wife at home. But later on, Steury called me and he told me, "Where is your wife?" I told my wife is at home. Dr. Steury told me, which course? I told him that he was trained as a pastor. Then Dr. Steury told me, "Go and bring her. We will employ in the hospital." And Sue Steury was a very kind mother. She could guide us, and she was a very humble mother with compassion. That is what I can remember about our late mom, Sue Steury and Daktari. They were people who had the heart for the ministry and for the people in the community. We really miss them. May God rest them in peace. Thank you. They really serve God. Diligently, they offered themselves fully to the ministry.
And they loved Tenlek and the people here.
For sure. That is why when he advised me when I became the pastor. Daktari came and he talked to me. You are a young pastor. He actually talked to me about the ministry, the pastoral work.
Wow.
That is why he told me, bring your wife, we employ the